All right, Raleigh is doing some serious action hero moves here, like it's a exploding building or an airplane or something, and it's James Bond or Mission Impossible, which is fun. I got no problem with it, but he didn't do any of this. I mean, obviously, my biggest problem with the film is, where is Robert Dudley? She also appears to be in a cave or something. She would have been in a palace, would have had tapestries on the wall. I'm Dr. Joanne Paul, and I'm a Tudor historian and author of The House of Dudley. And I'm here with History Hit to review Elizabeth and Elizabeth the Golden Age. All right, let's have a look.
Waves of death have closed about me. The cords of hell have encompassed me about, and the snares of death have overtaken me.
So we're starting with punishment for heresy, which is being burned at the stake. The heretics are brought in. They have them shaved here. In most representations of the heretics being burned at the stake, their heads aren't shaved. I think this might have to do with balancing the scene later when Elizabeth's hair is quite shorn.
By order of their gracious majesties, Queen Mary and King Philip, we are come to witness the burning of these Protestant heretics who have denied the authority of the one true Catholic Church and of His Holiness the Pope. Let them burn for all eternity in the flames of hell.
He's talking about the burning being reflective of the flames of hell. That was part of the logic behind this punishment, is that it was reminiscent of hell fire.
God bless you, Master Ridley! Love of God! Friends, help me! I burn too slowly!
So he's just mentioned Master Ridley. So this places this in 1555, because I believe that's meant to be Nicholas Ridley, who was executed alongside Hugh Latimer. There wasn't a woman who was executed with them as well, but many women were executed for heresy. He's burning too slowly. This was supposed to have been the case with Latimer and Ridley. Ridley's brother-in-law added more fuel to the flame to try to help him die faster. And apparently all that happened is it just burned his lower half. So in many ways an accurate, based on the sources we have, representation of that moment.
Princess Elizabeth! Princess Elizabeth! You are accused of conspiring with Sir Thomas Wyatt and others against Her Sovereign Majesty, and are arrested for treason. I am commanded to take you hence from this place to the Tower.
So Elizabeth is being brought into the Tower of London. There's a head on a stake in Traitor's Gate being brought into the Tower. That would be a very silly place to put a head on a stake. The whole point of putting a head on a stake was so that everyone would see it, so it was up on the bridges, not in a little gate like this, but I guess they're trying to demonstrate the danger, raise the stakes, as it were, of this moment. Princess Elizabeth was arrested and brought to the Tower in 1554.
Denials are all in vain.
She was treated more nicely than this, though. She was put up in what had been her mother's apartments, where she had stayed before her coronation. So this sort of bare rock cell is not the case. She was interrogated, though. She was asked about her role in Wyatt's rebellion and treasons against her sister, Mary I.
Mass?
You pretend, but in your heart.
What's that? What say you, madam? Speak up!
She's still a royal, so the idea that they're like screaming at her and interrogating her this intensely probably wasn't the case. But she was interrogated.
Madam, if there is some small truth in these charges, however innocently or unknowingly you did proceed, you had best confess.
I ask you why we must tear ourselves apart for this small question of religion. Catholic
Small?
and Protestant.
You think it's small, though it killed your mother?
Yeah, and this idea that Elizabeth is going to speak up for religious toleration and this small question of religion. Elizabeth did take a fairly practical approach to religion at some points in her reign, but everyone in the Tudor period was religious and understood how important these confessional questions were. So presenting her as this sort of beacon of toleration this early in the film, they're doing it for a point in the film, but wouldn't have necessarily been the case. Elizabeth remained in the Tower for a short while. I think she was brought in March and released into house arrest in May. So she wasn't there for a terribly long time. So Elizabeth has been brought in to see her sister Mary, who is currently queen.
Come here. Closer, so I might see your face. When I look at you, I see nothing of the king, only that whore, your mother. My father never did anything so well as to cut off her head.
Your Majesty forgets he was also my father.
Now I have to stop here just for a second. I mean, they're trying to present Mary I in really a horrible way. Visually, you know, Elizabeth's sort of beauty and purity next to Mary's sort of disheveled sort of older appearance. She also appears to be in a cave or something. She would have been in a palace, would have had tapestries on the wall, and it would have looked a whole lot nicer than this. So they're using this sort of visual of darkness to present Mary as quite the villain in this. And Mary and Elizabeth, they had quite a good relationship for much of their lives. Mary ended up taking a sort of maternal approach to Elizabeth because they were, she was 16, 17 years older than Elizabeth, and looked after her. There were rough patches in their relationship, this being one, when she suspects Elizabeth of plotting against her. That happens quite a bit earlier in the reign. They're playing a lot with time here. As I said, the executions were 1555. Elizabeth was in the Tower in 1554. This, I think, is supposed to be setting up towards the end of Mary's reign, which is in 1558. So they're compressing time a little bit here. But Elizabeth did fairly well during the majority of Mary's reign.
Why will you not confess your crimes against me?
Because, Your Majesty, I have committed none.
You speak with such sincerity. I see you are still a consummate actress.
We just got a great close-up of Elizabeth there, Kate Blanchett playing Elizabeth, and you'll notice she's got very light eyes. Elizabeth actually had her mother's eyes, those dark brown Boleyn eyes that were so captivating. If you look at portraits of Elizabeth, especially young Elizabeth, she's got those very dark eyes, which was quite a contrast with the then very light red hair. Kate Blanchett apparently couldn't wear the contacts that would darken her eyes, so she's got light eyes here, which I think is kind of too bad because that's part of the charm and the visual appeal of Elizabeth was those dark Boleyn eyes.
My husband is gone. They have poisoned my child. They say it is a tumour.
Philip II did leave Mary, and Mary thought she was pregnant towards the end of her reign, but it was probably a tumour.
Madam, you are not well.
They say this cancer will make you queen, but they are wrong. Look there, it is your death warrant. All I need do is sign it.
Mary, if you sign that paper, you will be murdering your own sister. You will promise me something? Mm-hmm. When I am gone, you will do everything in your power to uphold the Catholic faith. Do not take away from the people the consolations of the Blessed Virgin, their Holy Mother. When I am queen, I promise to act as my conscience dictates.
So this threat to Elizabeth, her life, that she won't become queen, it was a question whether the succession would go to Elizabeth, because Mary might have a child. There were other contenders, but really it was quite straightforward, based on Henry VIII's will, that Elizabeth was next in line to the throne, and Mary knew that at the end of her reign, at the end of her life.
To the north, I present unto you Elizabeth, your undoubted queen.
All right, so obviously the coronation of Elizabeth I, Christopher Eccleston, Doctor Who, here playing Thomas Howard, presenting the Queen. What's interesting about Elizabeth's coronation, or one of the interesting things about Elizabeth's coronation, was that it was a Catholic coronation. It was still a Catholic country when she was crowned in January 1559. So it was a Latin ceremony. Her outfit here is based on the coronation portrait of Elizabeth I, which is actually painted later in her reign, but is thought to be based on what it was that she looked like when she was crowned, as quite a young woman. Her hair is loose, which is both a sign of the fact that she is a maiden, she is young and unmarried, but also when her mother was crowned, pregnant with her, her hair was down as well. We saw one of the women amongst her who was also with her in that Tower of London scene is Kat Ashley, who was Elizabeth's governess and dear friend. What's interesting about her is they're presenting her here as a young woman, as a young friend. She was 30 years older than Elizabeth and dies not that long after this in 1565, I think, whereas here she's very much Elizabeth's contemporary.
I crown thee, Elizabeth, Queen of England, Ireland, and France.
Queen of England, Ireland, and France. English monarchs continued to lay claim to the French crown well into, I think they stop around the late 18th, early 19th centuries. But of course, by the time Elizabeth comes to the throne, there is no land in France anymore because Mary has just, right before her death, lost Calais. Robert Dudley. Okay, we have to pause and enjoy Fines as Robert Dudley here. Robert Dudley was at the coronation. We're very lucky we have images of the coronation procession. Elizabeth being paraded through the streets to and from her coronation. And Robert Dudley, along with his elder brother Ambrose, who does not get a look in here, are right behind her, leading her horses. Robert Dudley is her master of the horse, which means he's often in close physical proximity to Elizabeth as he is at the coronation.
God save your majesty.
So I think this is meant to be after the coronation. She is gonna dance with Dudley. All right, Robert Dudley. Let's take a moment and talk about Robert Dudley. So Robert Dudley, at this point, this is 1559, Robert Dudley is the grandson, son, and brother of executed traitors, two of whom, his father and his brother, had only been executed 5 or 6 years before this is taking place. So he is not an ideal choice to be a paramour of Elizabeth, but very soon after her, she comes to the throne, after her coronation, the rumors start that there is something going on between Elizabeth and Robert Dudley. The ambassadors talk about her being in his rooms day and night. We know from his own accounts that they are having picnics in St. James's Park, and he's giving her gifts and everything else. So there seems to be something going on between them. I think in this film they establish that he's visiting her at Hatfield as well, that they do have a physical relationship. We don't know if that's the case or not, but certainly there is a great affection between them, and she is very keen to have him close to her. When the initial lists are drawn up of people to join her court, when she knows she's going to be crowned queen, and they're drawn up by Cecil, who becomes Lord Burleigh, he isn't on the list. She adds him later. Burleigh wanted him in France and as far away from Elizabeth as possible, which again gives us, I think, a little bit of a clue that there was something going on between them.
Play a Volta!
The Volta. So the Volta was a 16th century dance. It was danced in the Tudor court. It begins with a galliard, which is what they're going to do here, which is the sort of prancing that they do, setting it up. There we go. Not easy to make these dance moves look good, by the way, but Blanchett and Fiennes. And what's scandalous about the Volta is that it does involve hoisting the woman up in the air by usually her thigh or her hip. I think I don't remember, it's this film or another one, they suggest that it has to be done sort of by her crotch. It probably wasn't. It was just a sort of hip, and he's lifting her with his leg, as well as, here I am trying to demonstrate it to you, with his leg as well as with his arm. So it's not quite as sexual, I guess, as is often represented. But it was a very physical dance, and they were very physically close to each other. There's a very famous painting of thought to be Robert Dudley and Elizabeth dancing the Volta. It's in Penshurst Place in Kent. You can find an image online. We don't know whether it is, in fact, them in the painting, but this scene is very much based on that painting. The court all around. I think there's a dog in it as well. You could see in this, there's one of Elizabeth's women is a dwarf. Thomasina was a member of her court, though it didn't arrive until I think the 1570s. But she's in that painting as well. Again, it might not be them, but it's often used to represent Elizabeth and Dudley dancing the Volta as they do here. So people would not have been terribly pleased with the idea that Robert Dudley was that close to the Queen. And I think, as we'll see later in the film, as everyone knew, he was also already married. And Elizabeth knew that as well.
Marry me.
La reine semble très intime avec Lord Robert, n'est-ce pas? Avec moi, elle joue la mégère, avec lui, l'amoureuse. Enfin quoi?
Ah, Duke of Anjou. They were playing with time a lot here. The Duke d'Anjou came to England in 1579 and 1581. which is many, many years after all of this. Elizabeth was approaching her 50s, which Kate Blanchett is not doing here. At that point, Robert Dudley had already married a second time. Lots had happened that isn't really represented in this film. It was a serious consideration that she might marry the Duc d'Anjou. There was a lot of pushback against that, though, including from Robert Dudley and a lot of her courtiers, and popular resistance to it as well. A man, slightly appropriately named John Stubbs, had his hand cut off for writing a pamphlet objecting to this French match.
Will the Duke not come to dance?
Madame, His Grace is unfortunately indisposed. He has some pains on the stomach.
I'm very sorry for it.
We wish to give the Duke this ring as a token of our love.
Madame, allow
No.
me.
I shall give it to him myself.
Madame, I should not.
Sir William, come along.
And so in the scene, Elizabeth finds Duc d'Anjou, whom I don't know if they do it in this film, but she calls her Frog, which then of course gets associated with the French forevermore after. She finds him in this debauched sort of scene, lots going on, and he's wearing women's clothing, as we'll see. There is no record of him ever engaging in those sorts of practices. However, his elder brother, Henri III, Henry III, did. And there are rumors of him having same-sex relationships with men as well as women, and cross-dressing. So I think they're trying to sort of combine those two figures. He never came to England, though he was presented as a suitor to Elizabeth.
You stare, madame. What is it? Do you see something strange, perhaps?
You are wearing a dress, Your Grace.
Oh, yes, I am wearing a dress. Yes, I'm wearing a dress. I wear a dress like this, my mother, and you know. But I only dress like this when I'm alone, in private, with my friends.
Your Grace. Although my affection for you is undiminished, I have, after an agonizing struggle, determined to sacrifice my own happiness for the welfare of my people.
Oh, my God.
And so they used him sort of caught out in this situation as a very easy excuse for Elizabeth to turn down his marriage proposal. There was nothing like this that we know of that actually took place, and actually it had a lot more to do with the resistance to the idea of the French match, and of course the fact that they had different religions. He was Catholic, and the idea that Elizabeth would marry a Catholic, a French Catholic, who was a man and therefore was meant to rule over her, and that the throne then might end up in French hands if they had a child together, obviously terrified a lot of people. It was the same resistance that Mary I experienced when she married Philip II of Spain, except at least they were both Catholic, whereas Elizabeth and Anjou had different religions, and that was really what they put forward as being the stumbling block to any marriage between them.
Speak up!
Right, so we're at the very end of the film, and like I said, I think the presentation of her like this, with her hair very short, is meant to mirror the martyrs at the beginning of the film, that she is in some sense giving up herself and her life to serve what she believes in.
I have become a virgin.
And then she emerges with the white makeup, the ruff, this presentation of Elizabeth I, the wig that we know so well. Elizabeth started wearing makeup probably in the 1560s. It's suggested that she started wearing it after she had an encounter with the smallpox that may have scarred her face. And again, a lot of this is supposed to be, so they're playing with time a lot here, because we've seen things that take place in the 1580s, but her emergence in this image happens in the 1560s. So yeah, they're moving things around a whole lot, which is fine. They're trying to tell a particular story. And here she compares being the Virgin Queen, refusing those attachments, particularly to Robert Dudley, as being a new sort of presentation of the Virgin Mary, giving people something else to worship in this stripped down new religion. So that's meant to be the conclusion of all these suits and who is Elizabeth going to marry. That doesn't really conclude until much, much later. As I said, she's still courting Anjou well into the 1580s. But she does say very early on in her reign that she is married to the realm and that she won't marry, but she goes back and forth. She's the great prevaricator. And she walks right past Dudley there without even a look, which, if compared to the Volta, the dance scene, where there's that real close, intimate connection between them, it's obviously meant to show that she has discarded that, she has put it aside. They don't ever marry, Elizabeth and Robert Dudley. There's all sorts of rumors that they do, that they have a secret child, but they don't. But they do stay close friends right up till the end of his life, which is just after the Spanish Armada. He dies in September 1588. And they remain very, very close through that whole time. The last letter that he sends to her before he dies, she writes in her own handwriting on it his last letter and keeps it by her bedside until her own death in 1603. So Elizabeth is a fantastic film. There's no question there. Kate Blanchett, I mean, there's some fantastic actresses who have played Elizabeth, but she has to be up there as one of the best. I think she really embodies Elizabeth in a fantastic way. Yes, they play around with the time, the sequence of things happening. That's just movie making. I don't have a huge problem with that. One of the things, my little personal quibble with it is I think they could lean into the drama more of why Robert Dudley was such a bad choice for Elizabeth, or was perceived to be such a bad choice for Elizabeth. This legacy of treason he has in his family. He himself had been convicted and imprisoned for treason. We don't quite get that in Elizabeth. I think too, it's hard not to see the presentation of the Catholics. You know, they're always in darkness and sort of hunched over and in caves. The presentation of the Catholics as a bit problematic, a bit of an issue, but I understand what they're doing in trying to make them antagonists. I think they could have introduced a little bit more complexity and nuance to that, though. It's a thoroughly enjoyable film with a few historical quibbles. I suppose, I mean, it's a solid 8 out of 10, though, at least. 8.5 out of 10, I think. I'd watch it again. Can we watch it again? All right, Elizabeth, the Golden Age. So really the sequel to Elizabeth. We still have Kate Blanchett.
A puddle in the way. Majesty.
A puddle?
Clive. Hi, Clive. Clive is playing Walter Raleigh. This is a very famous supposed scene where he throws down his cloak over a puddle so that Elizabeth doesn't have to walk in the puddle. Almost certainly didn't happen. It's in a story, I think 80 years after the event was supposed to have taken place. Raleigh almost certainly met Elizabeth in the normal sort of way. Behind her, there, Elizabeth Throckmorton, who does end up marrying Raleigh in secret many years later. It's 1591, I think, so after the Spanish Armada, which is in fact the climax of this film. So again, playing with time.
You'll have to see the Lord Chamberlain, sir.
Which one is he?
He's over there. You can't come in.
So how am I to see him if you won't let me through?
You must wait for him to come out.
And when will he come out?
There's no way of knowing that, sir.
I had less trouble than this boarding a Spanish ship.
Raleigh, famous, of course, for being one of the privateers, the pirates of Elizabeth, who is harassing Spanish ships. And that is absolutely true. And we have the same Spanish ambassador, that she tells off later in the film, giving stuff away. What I like here is that they are still showing that she has suitors. They're presenting suitors to her, Ivan the Terrible, and she's meant to be still considering them, which is good because she doesn't really close the door on marriage, as they seem to imply at the end of the last film. I don't know what she's got on her head, by the way. I don't know where they got that idea from. Feel free, tell me in the comments if I'm missing some portrait where she's wearing some sort of explosion of feathers on her head. It's a little weird.
Spain, wealthy.
He's rather handsome.
How old is he?
Young, I believe, Majesty. An Austrian alliance would keep France quiet.
And put Philip on a leash.
And yeah, Elizabeth was considering much younger suitors. Anjou, who we saw in the previous film, was I think 24 years, 26 years younger than Elizabeth when he came over to court her. So that continued. And it continued well past the time that Elizabeth might be expected to have children, for instance.
How much longer do you think I can play this game, Francis?
Virginity is an asset that holds its value well.
The Queen is at her prayers. Stop! Elizabeth is a whore! Mary Stuart is a true queen! Elizabeth!
You bring news.
The Queen has been attacked. The assassin seized. The Queen unharmed.
Unharmed?
And you, ma'am, are to be tried for treason.
Me?
All right, so Mary Queen of Scots, Mary Stuart, who is imprisoned in England. She's imprisoned in England for a very long time. This is Paulet, who was in charge of keeping her. It's absolutely the case. I mean, she was imprisoned in a very nice set of apartments, but it was hard on her, and she gained a lot of weight and became very unwell because she wasn't able to walk or ride or do any of those things that would have kept her healthy. She's being presented here with evidence of her plotting against Elizabeth, which she did get caught doing that by Francis Walsingham. He was intercepting letters and allowing letters to pass. He waited for everyone involved in the plot, the Babington plot, to reveal themselves and incriminate themselves, including Mary Stuart. And in the last letter, she wrote, "Let the plot begin," or something along those lines. And that's really, she was in trouble after that because the plot involved assassinating Elizabeth and replacing Elizabeth with Mary, Queen of Scots. I think in this scene they suggested that there had been an assassination attempt. They never let it get that far to actually attempt to assassinate Elizabeth, but Walsingham knew of the plot against Elizabeth that Mary, Queen of Scots was involved in. I love the way they present Mary, Queen of Scots in this, because she is plotting against Elizabeth, but she's left with very few options at this point. She's been imprisoned for many, many years. She's been exiled from her country. Her throne has been given to her son, who she hasn't seen again in many, many years. And she needs to do something. And so she ends up being involved in this plot, but she very much plays into the hands of Walsingham. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. There are descriptions of her execution. It was actually, I think, quite a small scaffold that they built, covered in black fabric of some kind, black cloth. Elizabeth, very distressed, as she was indeed, she spent a long time prevaricating over whether or not to have Mary, Queen of Scots, executed. In the end, she had the death warrant and signed it, and apparently sent it off to be enacted. This is according to her secretary, William Davison, who then brings it to Cecil, and they have her executed. But Elizabeth then says, "No, I didn't actually want it sent off. I I hadn't actually made the decision, and she has Davison committed to the Tower for it. Now, whether she's just trying to wash her hands of it, or and she did indeed send him off with it, or whether he, because he thought it was the right thing to do, took it to Cecil because they all wanted to make sure that she was executed, that she was, as a threat, gotten out of the way. Don't really know, but she was very, very upset by the idea of executing her cousin and another anointed queen.
It must be stopped! I want it stopped!
The costume reveal here, wearing red. Mary Queen of Scots did apparently wear red on her execution. It was meant to be a sign that she was a Catholic martyr. Very sort of Gothic feel they're creating with the stone here. All these men watching her. There is an image of her trial, and just these rows of men dressed as they are here, passing judgment on her. It's common for someone about to be executed to forgive the executioner. Mary's last words, as they're recorded, were in Latin. Essentially, I commend my soul to God. And here she falls into Raleigh's arms. Okay, ready for my biggest problem with this film? Where's Robert Dudley? They just write him out of this entire film, which he was still around. He was still very important to Elizabeth. He was the one, for instance, who found Elizabeth crying over a letter from Mary Queen of Scots at one point, when Mary Queen of Scots was essentially trying to manipulate Elizabeth a little bit into forgiving her, so it probably was to him that she would have turned in this sort of a moment. Ambrose Dudley, Robert's older brother, who doesn't get a look in either movie, was part of the trial of Mary Queen of Scots. So Raleigh, they've sort of inserted him in a way here to being this emotional support to Elizabeth, which it would have been Robert Dudley. The Empty Throne. This film doesn't do what some other films do and have Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots meet. I understand why some films do that. They wrote each other a lot of letters. That's very boring on film. But I like here that the Empty Throne, the fact that they have this intense relationship where essentially, I mean, the British Isles aren't big enough for the both of them. One of them is going to have to go. And it ends up being Mary Queen of Scots, though she's plotting to kill Elizabeth. The fact that they never meet, there's a drama to that as well. And so the Empty Throne representing Elizabeth's authority in this and her absence from Mary's life, her presence and her absence all at the same time. Anyway, I think it's fantastic. Now, in the reports we have of the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, it takes 3 blows. Which did happen at the time. The executioner missed the first time, hit the back of her head, and then the second cut didn't quite go all the way through, and then the third cut did it. So it was a tragically botched execution. There's also reports of her lips continuing to move for 15 minutes after she was executed. It's, I think, nice in this film that they just make it one clean cut and it's over, but in reality it went on longer than that.
Does any of this sound familiar?
I know nothing of any invasion
Well,
of
I
blacks.
refer to this plan as the enterprise of England. It should more accurately be called La Impresa de Inglaterra, because it is a Spanish plan. The plan of my one-time brother-in-law, your king, to attack my country.
Your country? It is my country that is under attack. Your so-called piratas, your pirates attack our merchant ships daily, and you think we don't know where the orders come from? The whole world knows these pirates sail up the Thames all the way to your royal bed.
Oh, Hatton. Christopher Hatton. He's getting all fiery, pulling his sword out. Christopher Hatton was a favorite of Elizabeth I. She loved dancing with him in particular, and I think it's cute that it's like a little puppy. So the implication here is a relationship between Elizabeth and particularly Raleigh, who's kind of standing in for a couple different people here. I think he's also standing in a little bit for Drake. And the implication that she's a whore, essentially, which was something that was said of her by her detractors, and in particular the Spanish.
You will leave my presence, sir.
Go back to your rat hole.
Tell Philip, I fear neither him, nor his priest, nor his armies.
Tell him if he wants to shake his little fist at us, we're ready to give him such a bite he'll wish he'd kept his hands in his pockets.
Yeah. She talks about Philip II as her brother-in-law, former brother-in-law. It's because he'd been married to Mary I. He actually tries to court her as well at the beginning of her reign. He presents a suit to her as well, and she turns him down. She's not interested, but that would have been an interesting way that history could have proceeded.
You see a leaf fall, and you think you know which way the wind blows. Well, there is a wind coming, madam, that will sweep away your pride.
I'll pause so that we can give Kate her fantastic moment in a second. They're talking about the wind blowing away her pride, and she's going to talk about the hurricane in her. I think in some ways that's a nod to the fact that the outcome of the Spanish Armada had a lot to do with the winds changing. That's not how they really present it here. It's not that dramatic, but that is a lot to do with what actually ended up stopping the Spanish Armada from landing and invading England.
I too can command the wind, sir! I have a hurricane in me that will strip Spain bare if you dare to try me!
Fantastic. I mean, I love that scene. It wouldn't have happened exactly like that. Don't care. It's just a fantastic scene, and I think it speaks to Elizabeth certainly had a temper, and she would unleash it at various points, and that is exactly the situation in which she would have unleashed it. So I have no problems with that scene whatsoever. I think it's great. The speech at West Tilbury before the Spanish Armada. We have records of this. Elizabeth did visit the troops at West Tilbury, largely, by the way, because they were commanded by Robert Dudley. And some of her speech is about how great Robert Dudley is, and Robert Dudley is the one who invites her, tells her to do the speech, make sure that the speech is recorded, all of that sort of stuff. He's not in the film, whatever. I'm clearly over it. She does give this speech. The contemporary descriptions of her, she is wearing some armor. It's probably just a sort of breastplate over a white dress. She also has a helmet with a big feathery plume. I think here they're trying to reflect that look from the coronation a little bit. But she was trying to evoke the look of sort of Pallas Athena, like a warrior goddess.
My loving people! We see the sails of the enemy approaching. We hear the Spanish guns over the water. Soon now, we will meet them face to face. I am resolved in the midst and heat of the battle to live or die amongst you all!
this speech, they've taken bits from the recorded speech that we have. She opens it, our loving people, my loving people. That's accurate. This bit of exposition about seeing the sails of the enemy and so on is added, but the in the heat of the battle heat in the midst of the battle to live and die amongst you, that is from the recorded speech as we have it. And she talks in a second too, I think, about the day of battle. They were there for weeks, if not months, just kind of waiting. There was no moment where the Spanish were definitely about to land and they were about to go to war. There were lots of camps like this around the country, and they were all just sort of stationed to see if the Spanish turned up and where. Obviously, for dramatic reasons, they're trying to suggest that it's all going to take place at Tilbury. She's there at Tilbury because that's definitely where the Spanish are imminently about to land. That wasn't the case. Again, it had a lot more to do with where Robert Dudley was.
While we stand together, no invader shall pause. Let them come with the armies of hell. They will not pass. And when this day of battle is ended, we meet again in heaven, or on the field of victory.
What I find really interesting about this scene and their presentation of it is that they don't include the most famous line from that speech, which is, though I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too, which is suggesting that her spirit transcends this feeble, weak female body that she's been given and is a kingly spirit. She has the heart and the stomach of a king, an English king. She's really trying to present herself in yes, in a masculine way, but almost in a way I think that defies gender entirely. And they've not included it here. I don't know why, but I think it's a really important line to understand how Elizabeth saw herself and how she wanted to be seen, which was not as a woman, but as a king. So fantastic scene, except we're missing Robert Dudley.
Clear the deck! That cannon's prize, set the fuse! Get everybody off the ship! Now! Get off the ship! Go! Get over there! Come on, let's go!
We're in the heart of the attack of the Spanish Armada here. Fire ships are coming for the Spanish ships. The English did use fire ships. There were 8 fire ships that were sent out to break up the Spanish formation. The Spanish Armada was a threat. It's not the sort of singular big threat that I think is often presented in film and TV about Elizabeth. There were several Spanish armadas over a series of years, either side of 1588, and this was the largest of them. They're playing into the threat. Well, they played into the threat in the 16th century. It was used as sort of propaganda at the time, and they're playing into it here for dramatic reasons. But they were outgunned by the Spanish. The Spanish ships were bigger, had more guns on them. So it was a concern that the Spanish would be able to break through. The use of the fire ships was not quite the dramatic moment that they present here. It was just one of many strategies that was used to repel the Spanish. And again, had a lot more to do with the change in the wind than anything else, which was used at the time as part of the sort of pro-Elizabethan Gloriana story because it was God. God obviously didn't want the Spanish to succeed, so he changed the wind. All right, Raleigh is doing some serious action hero moves here. Jumping off an exploding ship like it's a exploding building or an airplane or something in a James Bond or Mission Impossible, which is fun. I got no problem with it, but he didn't do any of this. His ship was involved. It was part of the English fleet that met the Spanish Armada. He may have been on it, but really he's standing in for Drake here, who had a much greater role in repelling the Spanish Armada. But Drake wasn't that pretty, so I think they've decided to go with Raleigh here to keep it focused on him. The fire ships were filled with gunpowder, so the idea is that they'd approach the Spanish ships and explode, which is what they did. And here's Elizabeth at West Tilbury. Now I'll pause here because it's a beautiful image of Elizabeth on the cliffs, watching this all take place. Her ships destroying this overpowering threat from the Spanish. None of that was possible, actually. She was at West Tilbury, which is in Kent, and is actually at the mouth of the Thames, so it's not on the coast, first of all. Second of all, this was all taking place just outside of Calais, so absolutely on the other side of the English Channel, so no one would have been able to see it if they were on the coast. But it's a very beautiful moment. And the fire and the water and the wind and the sky, it's fantastic, and the music. So, obviously we'll allow it, but could not have taken place. And again, the English used 8 fire ships. Looks like there's about 25 out there.
Tus vientos han humillado nuestro orgullo, nuestros navíos han sido destrozados.
So the film plays into this idea that it's God is on Elizabeth's side. Righteousness has prevailed against the evil Catholic Spanish. And the whole Armada falls apart immediately, the threat persisted for a very long time. They sort of wandered around the waters for a while. Some of the ships ended up near Scotland. It was more of a sort of petering out of a threat rather than this climactic moment. But movies, it's nice to have the climactic moment, and it is beautifully, beautifully done. Elizabeth the Golden Age doesn't quite capture, I think, what the first Elizabeth film has. It's still a very good film. It's a beautiful film. Kate Blanchett is still fantastic in it. Clive Owen I don't think he has what Joseph Fiennes had in terms of a pseudo-romantic interest for Elizabeth, and they're really reaching with presenting Raleigh in that way. Again, what's sort of frustrating is that although it's made much later than Elizabeth, they haven't added any nuance to their representation of especially the Spanish Catholics. And I think that would have made for a more interesting film. I love the presentation of Mary Queen of Scots. I think that's fantastic. I mean, obviously, my biggest problem with the film is, where is Robert Dudley? I'd like my Robert Dudley, please. It's a beautiful story that the pair of them have. And the fact that he dies just weeks after the Spanish Armada, again, gives that sense of a climax, and his passing coming at her most triumphant moment as queen is, I think, a really beautiful part of the story that they leave out. So for the Golden Age, probably around a 6 out of 10, I guess, but I mean, still beautiful film. If you liked this video, hit like or subscribe and check out History Hit's other fantastic content. And if you want more Robert Dudley in your life, check out The House of Dudley.